Captain Rebecca Viper Martinez had been flying combat missions for 12 years when the world changed overnight. She was one of the few female pilots who had earned her wings in the early 2000s, fighting tooth and nail against an old boys club that seemed determined to keep her grounded. Every promotion, every assignment, every moment of recognition had been a battle won through sheer determination and undeniable skill. Her call sign, Viper, wasn't just about her precision in the cockpit. It was about her ability to strike back when cornered. The morning of September 15th started like any other at Naval Air Station Oceana. Rebecca walked through the hangar bay, her flight suit crisp and her helmet tucked under her arm. At 34, she commanded respect from pilots half her age and twice her ego. The younger aviators would gather around during briefings, hanging on her every word as she shared hard-won wisdom from deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, demanding excellence while never forgetting what it felt like to be the outsider fighting for acceptance. Commander Jake Bulldog Thompson had been watching Rebecca's career with growing resentment. A political appointee who had secured his position through family connections rather than merit, he represented everything wrong with the military hierarchy. His own flying skills were mediocre at best, but his ability to navigate Pentagon politics was exceptional. For months, he had been looking for an opportunity to knock Rebecca down a peg, to prove that women didn't belong in combat roles despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The opportunity came during a routine training exercise over the Atlantic. Rebecca was leading a formation of 6 F-18 Super Hornets in a complex air-to-air combat simulation. The mission parameters were straightforward: intercept and neutralize a simulated enemy threat approaching the carrier group. What Rebecca didn't know was that Commander Thompson had secretly modified the exercise parameters, creating a scenario designed to make her fail publicly and dramatically. As the formation climbed to altitude, Rebecca's radar operator, Lieutenant Mark Radar Williams, noticed something unusual in the mission briefing data. The enemy aircraft signatures didn't match any known threat profile, and the intercept vectors seemed deliberately confusing. He voiced his concerns over the intercom, but Rebecca, focused on leading her team safely through the exercise, dismissed his worries as pre-mission jitters. The trap was set perfectly. As Rebecca's formation approached the designated intercept point, they found themselves surrounded by 12 F-18s bearing unfamiliar markings. The radio crackled with official-sounding commands ordering them to stand down and return to base immediately. The voice belonged to Commander Thompson, who was orchestrating the entire scenario from a command aircraft circling high above the exercise area. Rebecca's instinct screamed that something was wrong. In her 12 years of service, she had never encountered a training scenario that felt this realistic, this threatening. The aircraft surrounding her formation were flying in attack patterns, their weapon systems clearly active despite this being a training exercise. Her wingmen were reporting similar concerns over the radio, their voices tense with confusion and growing alarm. What Rebecca didn't realize was that one of the pilots in the surrounding aircraft was Lieutenant Commander David Phoenix Chen, her former student from the Navy's elite Top Gun program. 3 years earlier, Rebecca had been his primary instructor, teaching him the advanced tactics that would later save his life during a deployment to the Persian Gulf. Phoenix had never forgotten the lessons she taught him, nor the way she had fought to ensure he received the recognition he deserved when his commanding officer tried to take credit for his successful missions. As the situation escalated, Phoenix began to recognize something familiar in the lead aircraft's flying patterns. The smooth, precise movements, the way the pilot positioned her aircraft to protect her wingmen, the subtle tactical adjustments that maximized defensive positioning while maintaining offensive capability. These were all signatures of Rebecca's teaching. His heart began to race as he realized he might be participating in something far more sinister than a training exercise. The radio chatter grew more aggressive as Commander Thompson ordered Rebecca's formation to surrender their aircraft and submit to what he claimed was a legitimate military operation. Rebecca's response was immediate and defiant. She had spent her entire career fighting against those who would use their authority to crush others, and she wasn't about to start backing down now. Her voice cut through the radio static with the authority of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and countless hours in the cockpit. Phoenix watched the tactical display with growing unease as the situation spiraled beyond any reasonable training scenario. The aircraft he was flying alongside were making aggressive moves that violated every safety protocol he had ever learned. Weapons systems were hot, radar locks were being acquired, and the radio chatter suggested that someone was about to make a terrible mistake. His training as a naval aviator warred with his loyalty to the chain of command, but his debt to Rebecca Martinez tipped the scales. Breaking radio silence, Phoenix transmitted on the emergency frequency that he knew Rebecca would be monitoring. His voice was calm but urgent as he identified himself and requested immediate clarification of the exercise parameters. The response from Commander Thompson was swift and harsh. Phoenix was ordered to maintain radio silence and continue with the mission as briefed. But Phoenix had heard enough doubt in Thompson's voice to confirm his suspicions. Rebecca's formation was now completely surrounded, with multiple radar locks painting their aircraft from every direction. The situation had escalated beyond anything that could be considered a training exercise. Lieutenant Williams' voice crackled through the intercom with increasing urgency as he reported that some of the surrounding aircraft were carrying live ammunition rather than training rounds. Rebecca's blood ran cold as she realized that Commander Thompson's vendetta against her had reached a level that endangered not just her career, but the lives of her entire flight crew. The next few minutes would determine whether Rebecca's reputation as one of the Navy's finest pilots was built on solid ground, or merely the illusion of competence that Thompson claimed it to be. As she keyed her radio to respond to the escalating threats, Rebecca drew upon every lesson she had learned during her climb through the ranks of a military establishment that had never wanted her to succeed. Her voice, when it finally cut through the chaos, carried the weight of a dozen years spent proving that courage and skill know no gender. Phoenix recognized that voice immediately. It was the same voice that had talked him through his first carrier landing, the same voice that had taught him to trust his instincts when the book said otherwise, the same voice that had defended him when a superior officer tried to blame him for a mission failure that wasn't his fault. In that moment, Phoenix made a decision that would define the rest of his career and possibly save the lives of 6 innocent aviators who had become pawns in someone else's political game. The standoff continued to escalate as Commander Thompson's patience wore thin. From his command aircraft, he issued increasingly desperate orders for Rebecca to comply with his demands. The elaborate scenario he had constructed was falling apart as other pilots began to question the legitimacy of the exercise. Phoenix's intervention had created doubt in the minds of the other aviators, and that doubt was spreading like wildfire through the formation. Rebecca maintained her defensive position while her mind raced through possible escape routes. She had trained for scenarios like this during her time at the Navy's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape school. But those exercises had always assumed the enemy was foreign. The realization that she was being hunted by her own colleagues added a psychological dimension to the crisis that no amount of training could have prepared her for. As the tension reached a breaking point, Phoenix made his move. Banking sharply away from the aggressive formation, he positioned his aircraft between Rebecca's flight and the most immediate threat. His radio transmission was clear and decisive as he announced his intention to escort Captain Martinez's formation back to base, citing safety concerns about the exercise parameters. The move was career suicide if he was wrong, but Phoenix had learned from Rebecca that sometimes doing the right thing required risking everything. The domino effect was immediate and dramatic. Other pilots began to break away from the aggressive formation, their own doubts about the exercise finally overcoming their fear of disobeying orders. Commander Thompson's carefully orchestrated trap was collapsing as the very people he had counted on to execute his plan began to question his authority and motivations. Within minutes, What had been a 12-aircraft formation designed to intimidate and overwhelm Rebecca's flight had dissolved into chaos. Pilots were demanding clarification over multiple radio frequencies. Safety officers were questioning the exercise parameters, and the Air Traffic Control Center was scrambling to understand what was happening in their airspace. Commander Thompson's voice grew increasingly shrill as he tried to maintain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his ability to manage. Rebecca seized the moment of confusion to begin leading her formation toward home. Her defensive flying had bought precious time, and Phoenix's intervention had created the opening she needed. As her 6 aircraft formed up in a tight defensive pattern, she felt a surge of pride in the young pilots who had chosen to follow her lead despite the risks to their own careers. These were the moments that defined military leadership, not the ceremonies or commendations, but the split-second decisions made under pressure with lives hanging in the balance. The flight back to Naval Air Station Oceana was tense but uneventful. Rebecca's formation maintained strict radio discipline, while Phoenix and several other pilots provided escort coverage. The rebels' aircraft that had abandoned Thompson's formation were now flying protective patterns around Rebecca's group, their pilots having made the difficult decision to trust their instincts over their orders. As they approached the base, Rebecca could see emergency vehicles lining the runway. Word of the incident had clearly reached the air station, and the base commander was taking no chances with the safety of his aircraft and personnel. The landing pattern was carefully controlled, with each aircraft guided to specific parking spots where security personnel were waiting to debrief the pilots and secure the aircraft. Commander Thompson's aircraft was the last to land, and his reception was notably different from the others. Military police were waiting at his parking spot, and Rebecca could see the grim expressions on their faces as they escorted him from his aircraft. The elaborate scheme that was supposed to end her career had instead exposed his own corruption and abuse of authority. The investigation that followed would reveal the full scope of Thompson's misconduct. For months, he had been using his position to target female pilots and minority officers, creating impossible scenarios designed to make them fail and justify his discriminatory policies. Rebecca's case was just the most dramatic example of a pattern of behavior that had been destroying careers and undermining military readiness. Phoenix's testimony was crucial in establishing the timeline of events and Thompson's deliberate deception. His decision to break ranks and protect his former instructor had not only saved lives, but had also provided the evidence needed to expose the conspiracy. The young pilot's courage in standing up to authority would earn him a commendation and accelerated promotion. But more importantly, it would validate the lessons Rebecca had taught him about moral courage and integrity. The aftermath of the incident rippled through the Navy's aviation community like a shockwave. Thompson's removal from command was swift and decisive, but the damage he had inflicted on the careers of other pilots would take years to repair. Rebecca found herself at the center of a broader investigation into discriminatory practices within the naval aviation community, her experience serving as a catalyst for long overdue reforms. As the dust settled, Rebecca reflected on the strange turn of events that had nearly ended her career, but ultimately validated everything she had fought for. The student who had once looked to her for guidance had become her protector, proving that the values she had tried to instill in the next generation of naval aviators had taken root and flourished. The incident would become a case study in military academies and leadership schools, a powerful example of how corruption and prejudice can infect even the most elite military units. But for Rebecca, the real victory was much more personal. The knowledge that she had faced down her most dangerous enemy and emerged stronger than ever, with a new generation of pilots ready to carry forward her legacy of excellence and integrity. In the days following the incident, Rebecca found herself thrust into the spotlight as news of the aerial confrontation spread throughout the military community. The story had all the elements that captured public attention: courage under fire, corruption in high places, and the triumph of right over might. Rebecca was uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves rather than becoming a poster child for military reform. The formal investigation took 3 months to complete, during which Rebecca continued her regular duties while providing testimony and evidence to military investigators. The process was exhausting and emotionally draining, forcing her to relive the trauma of being hunted by her own colleagues while defending decisions made in split seconds under extreme pressure. Throughout it all, she maintained her composure and professionalism, earning the respect of even her harshest critics. Commander Thompson's court-martial was a media sensation that exposed the darker side of military culture. Witness after witness testified about his pattern of discrimination and abuse of authority, painting a picture of an officer who had used his position to settle personal scores and advance his own agenda at the expense of military readiness and personnel welfare. The proceedings revealed that Rebecca's case was just one of many, with Thompson having targeted numerous other pilots over the years. Phoenix's role in the incident had transformed him from a promising young pilot into a symbol of moral courage within the aviation community. His willingness to risk his career to protect his former instructor resonated with junior officers who had often felt powerless in the face of institutional corruption. The Navy recognized his actions with a commendation for valor, but more importantly, he had earned the respect of his peers and superiors. The ripple effects of the incident extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. New policies were implemented to prevent the abuse of training exercises for personal vendettas, and additional oversight was established for senior officers in positions of authority. The Navy's culture began to shift slowly, but measurably toward greater accountability and transparency, with Rebecca's case serving as a catalyst for broader reforms. Rebecca's own career took an unexpected turn in the aftermath of the incident. Rather than being sidelined or marginalized as she had feared, she found herself in greater demand than ever. Her expertise in crisis management and her reputation for integrity made her a valuable asset to the Navy's senior leadership, who were eager to demonstrate their commitment to reform and accountability. The promotion to colonel came 6 months after the incident, along with a new assignment as commander of the Navy's premier flight training program. It was a position that would allow her to shape the next generation of naval aviators, ensuring that the values of courage, integrity, and excellence would continue to define the community she had fought so hard to join. As she stood before her new command for the first time, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared young woman who had first stepped into a cockpit 20 years earlier had been transformed by adversity into a leader who could inspire others to greatness. The battles she had fought against prejudice and corruption had made her stronger, and the victory she had achieved was not just personal but institutional. The story of that September day over the Atlantic became legend within the naval aviation community. Young pilots would hear about Captain Martinez's courage under fire and Lieutenant Commander Chen's moral courage in standing up to authority. The incident served as a reminder that doing the right thing often requires tremendous personal sacrifice, but that the rewards, both personal and professional, far outweigh the risks. Years later, as Rebecca looked back on her career, she would identify that day as the moment when everything changed. Not just for her, but for the entire naval aviation community. The corruption and prejudice that had seemed insurmountable had been defeated by the simple act of people choosing to do what was right rather than what was easy. It was a lesson she would carry forward and pass on to every pilot who came under her command. Phoenix had gone on to become one of the Navy's most respected squadron commanders. His career trajectory, accelerated by the moral courage he had displayed during the incident. He often spoke at leadership conferences about the importance of standing up to authority when that authority was being abused, using his own experience as an example of how junior officers could make a difference when they were willing to take risks for the greater good. The relationship between Rebecca and Phoenix had evolved from instructor and student to professional peers and close friends. They often found themselves assigned to the same bases or deployed on the same missions, their shared experience creating a bond that transcended normal military relationships. Phoenix credited Rebecca with teaching him not just how to fly, but how to lead with integrity in an environment that didn't always reward moral courage. The changes that resulted from the incident were slow but measurable. Women and minorities began to see more opportunities for advancement in naval aviation, and the culture gradually shifted toward greater inclusivity and accountability. Rebecca's success in her new role as a commander provided a powerful example of what was possible when merit rather than prejudice determined advancement opportunities. Commander Thompson's disgrace had been complete and permanent. Court-martialed and dishonorably discharged, he had lost not only his career but his pension and benefits. The military justice system had sent a clear message that corruption and abuse of authority would not be tolerated, regardless of an officer's rank or connections. His case became a cautionary tale taught in military ethics courses. The training program that Rebecca now commanded became known throughout the Navy as one of the most rigorous and professional in the military. Her emphasis on technical excellence combined with moral courage produced graduates who were not only skilled aviators, but also leaders of integrity. The program's reputation attracted the best and brightest candidates, creating a virtuous cycle of excellence that reinforced the Navy's commitment to reform. Rebecca's own flying career continued to flourish under her new command. She maintained her proficiency in the latest aircraft and continued to participate in training exercises, though now from the perspective of someone setting policy rather than simply following orders. Her experience during the incident had given her unique insights into the importance of clear communication and ethical leadership in high-stress situations. The media attention surrounding the incident had made Rebecca something of a celebrity within military circles, a role she accepted reluctantly, but used effectively to advocate for continued reforms. She spoke at conferences and testified before congressional committees about the need for greater accountability in military leadership, always emphasizing that the real heroes were the young pilots who had chosen to follow their consciences rather than their orders. As the years passed, new challenges emerged that tested the reforms that had been implemented in response to the incident. Budget cuts, personnel shortages, and changing technology all created pressures that could have undermined the progress that had been made. But the foundation that Rebecca and others had built proved resilient, with a new generation of leaders committed to maintaining the standards of excellence and integrity that had been so hard-won. The incident over the Atlantic had become more than just a story about one pilot's courage under fire. It had become a symbol of the military's capacity for self-correction and reform, proof that even the most entrenched systems of corruption and prejudice could be overcome when people of good faith were willing to stand up for what was right. Rebecca's legacy would be measured not just in the missions she flew or the commands she held, but in the countless young officers who had learned from her example that true leadership meant serving others rather than serving oneself. On her retirement day, 25 years after first entering the cockpit of a Navy fighter, Rebecca stood before a formation of the pilots she had trained and led. The ceremony was formal and traditional, but the emotions were deeply personal. She had given her career to the service of her country, and in return, she had received the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others.